We're humans trying to get needs met, and we essentially have the same needs.
We all need money, right? We all do. So how do we do it in the right way and in integrity with our values and with what we want to do in the world?
It was apparently asked of Usui, who is it for? And he said, it's for everyone. It's for young, old, every gender. It's not something that is about whether you become a Buddhist or whether you go to the other extreme of that, whether you're really into angels. All those things are things that a teacher might bring to a class, but there's this basic fundamental simplicity that sits beneath it.
By getting really centered and grounded, I can open up my teaching style to make room for people who have a different view than me inside of these other places.
We know that Hayashi changed the name so that it became Hayashi Reiki Kenkyukai. He respected the fact that what he was doing was different to what Usui had taught him. So he's creating his own branch.
One of the most beautiful statements is that there's enough room for me at the top. I don't have to play these games of competition.
Welcome, friends, to the Reiki Women Podcast, an exploration into the profound depths of the system of Reiki from a Japanese spiritual perspective and how that relates to our modern lives.
We are keeping it real to Reiki's origins, challenging the New Age stereotype that things like crystals, chakras, and angels are authentic aspects of the system. I'm Bronwen Logan, and when I'm not writing best-selling books about the Japanese system of Reiki, 75,000 readers and counting, I'm here debunking outmoded Reiki myths and coaching individuals and groups through my website, Reiki with Bronwen.
And I'm Michaela Daystar, lead teacher and weaver of Heartscapes Reiki, connecting the dots between Reiki and environmental and social justice, because our individual healing cannot be extracted from healing relationship with the collective and with the land.
And I'm Carrie Varela from the Reiki Healing Society, here to help you transform your Reiki practice into a thriving, prosperous business. Because while passion fuels your purpose, it's time to make it sustainable, authentic, and beautifully you. We're three women diving into the heart of Japanese Reiki. We're building a community that centers women's voices and inspires well-being. We're not just for women, we're for everybody. Come join the conversation.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to Reiki Women Podcast. So delighted to have you with us here, as always. And today we are having a conversation that is speaking to really a couple of different groups of folks. So for those of you who are practitioners and teachers, we're speaking to you. And those of you who might be seeking practitioners or teachers, we're also speaking to you. Because in both of those spaces, it's important to understand where we are aligned with a person's practice, their style of teaching, their niche that they have created for themselves in how they present Reiki to the world. And this is a topic that on the surface is kind of a business topic, right? We talk about niching in business training and like finding your unique angle on the particular thing that you do. And then how do you talk about that? And how do you connect with people around that niche so that we know that there's good alignment between the person offering the service and the person coming to receive the service. And that, on the surface is a business topic. Underneath the surface of that topic, however, there is this richness around our values, how we align our business practices, and then how do our clients recognize those practices through the lens of our values? Are we in good integrity between what we really value, how we want to show up in the world, and what we are doing inside of our Reiki practice, how we are offering that to the world? And what are some of the pitfalls that we might fall into? What are some of the points of extremism or the points of hypocrisy, even the points of misalignment that we might fall into when we are attempting to distinguish our Reiki practice and our Reiki business from other people's and ultimately connect with the right people to receive our services? So a multi-layered conversation, a rich one that, I have this conversation in a lot of different circles with a lot of different colleagues. And I think it's a great one to bring to this platform where we are mingling people looking for Reiki, people providing Reiki, people wanting to understand how to do this in the best alignment with who we are in the world. So I'm excited to get into it, and I'm going to hand it over to Bronwen to get us started.
Thanks, Michaela. Yeah, what a journey that is. If I think of myself when you first start learning something like the system of Reiki, I knew from almost when I first started that I wanted to teach it. But then it's like, so what am I teaching? Am I teaching what my teacher taught? Because my first class was, higgledy-piggledy all over the place, a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of this. But the principle at the base of it, I think this is what I think everybody loves about the system of Reiki. It's got this gorgeous simplicity, and that sits at the base of all these different things that people do with it. So I felt that I could tap into that. And so then it's trying to decide as you go along exactly what is it that you want to teach. And I think this is what, Michaela, you were just saying. It's that bringing integrity into what you're doing. So finding a heart of integrity in your practice and then following that. And I think that was something that was really important to me. And I can see then how that journey is an ongoing one, because it could be that as an individual, I could really go down different paths. For me, the path that I was interested in was the Japanese origins of the system. And so, researching that, finding out about that, and that because it's such a different culture, has been fascinating. I love it. And it's something that I guess is always evolving for me, because it's something that I start to learn more of. I've been learning Japanese. Don't ask me to speak Japanese because I'm hopeless. But one day I aim to be decent at it. There's so many different directions you could take within your practice. Now, just because I'm interested in learning Japanese doesn't mean that my students, for example, should have to learn Japanese, or even that I would even teach anything to do with that. I could add a little bit of that in because it's a Japanese practice. It might help me to understand some of the techniques and practices a little bit better, possibly. Uh, but still, it doesn't mean that it's a better way of doing something, I guess is what I'm saying, right? So that simplicity that I talked about at the beginning still sits at the base of this foundation of this practice. We know that Usui was said to have answered in a question and answer format. At the beginning of one of the manuals for the Japanese Reiki Association, there's a question and answer section. And apparently back in 100 years ago, people used to ask questions of the teacher and they would write the answers down in their books. So we have this question and answer format at the beginning of one of the manuals. And it was apparently asked of Usui, who is it for? And he said, it's for everyone. It's for young, old, every gender. It's not something that is about whether you study Japanese or whether you become a Buddhist or whether you go to the other extreme of that, whether you're really into angels or crystals or whatever it might be. All those things are things that a teacher might bring to a class, but there's this basic fundamental simplicity that sits beneath it. And for me, I think that's a really important thing for all practitioners and teachers to remember, that sitting there and to hold that, I'm going to say almost sacred, right? It is this thing that is this way of being together. And then we add our own niching. I've heard that's a word. Yes. So thank you for teaching me that, you two. So niching into whatever area it is that really interests us. And as long as we're open about this with people and explain exactly what it is that we're doing, then I think that that is the most important part, keeping integrity to your practice and keeping that at the heart of what you're doing. What do you reckon, Carrie?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think this is a complicated topic. I wrote a post about this for my GoPro with Reiki mentorship program. And the title of it was "To Niche or Not to Niche." Um, and really, that's probably not the greatest question, because I mean, pretty much everybody in the marketing world will say, or I heard it said, I should say, I heard it said from one of the people that I really admire in the world of marketing, saying, a lot of times the reason why we're not really making traction in our business is because we're not niching, or we're resistant to niching. And I will raise my hand saying I was resistant to niching, because it's really hard with Reiki, right? Because Reiki is for everyone, and that I love the fact that I could, see one client with anxiety, and then I could see another client with, a health issue, and then the next client with a broken heart, or whatever. And it's just like, whatever's going on for you, Reiki is there to support you. But so this kind of generalist rather than specialist, I've always really like wondered, which is that, like, what's my strategy, right? A little bit of that, which we need a strategy for a Reiki business owner. But as it goes, the more you learn about something, I think a specialty just naturally comes and arises, and it becomes that evolution of who you are, and you developing your own unique gifts and wisdom, and then through that process, like, you become to more aware, like Bronwen, what you were saying, you're just like, really drawn to the Japanese Reiki, and now that's a huge part of what you offer, right? I mean, it's a huge part of what you bring forward in your Reiki business. And like, of course, and then coming back to people who are just seeking a Reiki teacher or a Reiki practitioner, it's nice to find one that does feel aligned with what you need, so maybe you have a specialty around, working with Reiki for heartbreak and loss, and that can be a really wonderful niche. And so most marketing people say that that's like the fast track, right, to finding clients that are aligned with you, is just to really be specific about what you're offering and why and who you're offering it for. Um, And, I found that it's kind of a counterintuitive thing, and it's scary. For me, it was really scary, because I was like, it felt safer to just keep my doors open to whoever ever wanted to, come and be a part of my practice. But to be a specialist on something, for whatever reason, it just felt like, you're slimming down the pool of potential people. So there's that. But, we kind of were talking about this topic before we began today. And I think there's also this kind of other side of niching that maybe be helpful to speak to, is just that, when do we do it wrong? Or when are we doing it in a way that's harmful, potentially? And, I guess I've been in this business, or been in the world of the healing arts long enough to realize that there's kind of these like generational ideas that, maybe are kind of outdated, or are kind of played out, and now there's like a new generation of practitioners coming forward, and we need something different than what, how is Reiki was shaped, with a generation of practitioners, or maybe a few generations of practitioners before us. But, so before we talked about niching, there was like the divide and conquer kind of thing. Like, how could you take Reiki and make your own lineage? Or how can you take Reiki and make it yours, or add something to it, or make it more special, or add a higher vibration to it, or bring, this specific angel and deity to it, or, and try to modify it, maybe in some, way of enhancing it. But then, what we've seen so much of that it's diluted Reiki, and that so many people were given Reiki trainings that weren't very well taught, or, the practitioner, the teacher didn't really have a solid understanding of Reiki, and or the materials that they used weren't, very well put together, because there's kind of a common practice within Reiki to like write your own manuals, from the outset, learning Reiki, and then write your own manuals to teach your own courses. And, so there's a lot of this way that Reiki has kind of strayed from the Japanese perspective. A lot of those things come from cultural and spiritual appropriation. It comes through, biases that are present in our society that are reflected in our healing practices. This is all something I've been diving into in my recent course called Decolonize Your Reiki Practice. So for whatever reason, we modified Reiki so much. I mean, there are so many different lineages out there, right? Like, I think somebody in the world of Reiki has tried to count them up, and there's well over, a few hundred different lineages of Reiki out there, and they're all different things, right? Like purple flame Reiki, Kundalini Reiki, all of these things, holy fire Reiki, all, so many different forms, right? But then are we losing the essence of that in this desire to shift the practice, or make something from the practice that represented us as individuals? And I think that that's somewhat of what you were talking about, Bronwen, is like, you take the Reiki course, and no matter how it's presented, whether it's presented well, and I hope that, a lot of us have taken really good Reiki courses, or maybe it wasn't presented all that well, but still there was Reiki in there, and it was that light of Reiki, it was that energy of Reiki, it was something that drew you to it. That's the real glue, that's the real adhesion for anyone in the world of Reiki. I mean, I felt that when I first took a Reiki training. And then I felt that, and I know that my students and my clients feel that, and that's the reason why they come back to me just as much as it is about the perspective and approach that I offer. So, I guess we're recognizing that. And I just feel that it's kind of a messy, fine line, because, when we do really like rigidly niche, there might be other people who could benefit from our services that kind of fall outside of that umbrella that we've created, So, for me, and the way that I really think of it is that in this modern age, is like, what is a good niche for Reiki is one that helps you work with a chronic health issue, or particular life circumstance, and how do we apply Reiki to that? Like Reiki for insomnia, Reiki for anxiety, Reiki for heartbreak. Grief is another really amazing niche, so it's not so much about distinguishing oneself as like, oh, here I am such this enlightened healer, and can you see the purple flames all around me, and let me just be in your presence and heal you, as opposed to, let's be humble, let's be human, and let's focus on how we can apply Reiki, and really help people have a better life, feel better in their body and mind. And how is it particularly well suited for that? And so, in my mind, that's the new niche. That's the new really powerful niche, and it's something that isn't so ego driven. It's more, really wanting to serve people and learning how to do that.
Yeah. There's so many layers to this conversation. My brain is like going in all the directions. But I think like at the heart of what I'm reflecting on as I'm listening to you all, and as we were talking about this topic earlier, is I'm really seeing in myself I'm self-reflecting on my own journey with this is what I'm doing. And I'm really seeing a certain pattern that has existed for me in different realms of my life. And in particular, I'm thinking about in my life as a political activist and my life as a Reiki teacher. And there's a certain similar kind of arc that happened in both of those spaces that does interconnect, because part of my niche, if you will, part of my perspective as a Reiki teacher is bringing in, social equity concerns. But that arc, that pattern that I'm reflecting on with some humility is this arc of extremism. And you brought this up, Bronwen, originally. This was kind of the original entry point for us for this conversation, was noticing, a tendency as we're trying to differentiate ourselves, or as we're finding ourselves inside of the system of Reiki, as we're, aligning our values and our interests inside of Reiki, and maybe, from a business perspective, wanting to stand out from the crowd, that there can be this kind of polarization into extremes. And, in the Reiki world, that might look like an extreme Western version and an extreme kind of origins version. So the extreme Western version might look like some of what you all have named, like constantly inventing new lineages and saying well, if I don't have a lineage that I have named, and this is my lineage because I have a particular affinity for dolphins, and so I'm going to create dolphin Reiki, and now it's going to have its own thing, and it's got to be a separate thing. I see that as kind of a Western extreme, where there's this kind of intense blending of traditions and perspectives from all over the place, and kind of putting that under the umbrella of Reiki, but then copywriting this new version of it, not acknowledging that Reiki in its original form actually looked quite different from all of that, right? For me, it often breaks down of there's actually two different fundamental understandings of what's happening inside of in the spiritual sense, from this one branch and this other branch, right? But so there's these kind of extreme versions inside of Western Reiki. And then on the other side, there might be extreme versions inside of those of us who want to retain and kind of, reclaim the origins of Reiki. And that might look like, saying that you have to be a Buddhist, or you have to have studied Japanese, like you were talking about earlier, Bronwen, or even holding up Usui as a savior, this is the only person, disregarding the fact that when Usui was creating this particular system, there were hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of other people developing new systems of spiritual practice at that same time in Japan in the Meiji period. And that Reiki as a spiritual concept and a spiritual point of focus existed hundreds, if not thousands of years in Japan prior to Usui's time. So that, Reiki as a point of practice inside of its origins is not a monolith either, right? It has its own very rich presence inside of Japan that, as Westerners in the 2020s, we can only really dip our toes into. And I've really loved learning as much as I can about some of those threads that go back much further from Usui. But so there's these extremes. And what I see in my own trajectory is that I have fallen into those extremes myself, and that mirrors the way that I worked inside of social justice generally, where I started on a very extreme kind of hard left, it's us versus them, we're right and they're wrong, very dualistic perspective on politics. There is a right way to think, and it's mine, and they're wrong. The way that they think, totally wrong, and makes no sense, and has no grounding in reality, and they're out of their minds. And so we have to change them and fix them. And, then there was, so this was 30 years ago. So then there's been this trajectory in my life that has involved a softening of that right versus wrong, that dualistic perspective. It's included opening up to a greater level of humanity and diversity within humanity. It's involved becoming more confident and rooted in my own values and beliefs, because a lot of that extremism came from a lack of confidence and a lack of solidity with who I am. And so anything that seems to contradict who I am, unsettled me so much that it must be wrong, right? And And so there was this, trajectory of softening and opening to other perspectives and opening to connection with people who thought very different. And eventually an ability to understand why a person might be thinking and acting the way they do, even if I disagree vehemently with what they're thinking, what their reasoning is, and what they're therefore doing, what their actions are. But I can understand why they're doing that, why it makes sense for them, and where those places of connection between what makes sense to me. Like, we're actually sharing certain values. We're just going about meeting those needs, or actually more essentially, we have the same needs, right? But we're going about meeting those needs in very different ways. And it's those methods of getting the needs met that where we're in conflict. But at the essence, we're humans trying to get needs met, and we essentially have the same needs. And so I'm in a very different place now. Took me decades to get here, around the ability to be in greater connection and solidarity with people who are very different than me. And just, I promise I'm bringing this back to our topic at hand, but we did have an episode about politics a couple of weeks ago. So, kind of still on that train. I've been in a lot of reflection and learning with, some of the teachers that I follow around this kind of critical analysis of the left, and seeing this pattern that is very common to left-leaning political activists, this inability to connect across difference, around philosophical difference, and this need to be right above all else, right? And that's actually gotten us it's a problem. and it's made us less effective, and it's made us less responsive. It's made us less able to connect. It's made us less able to build coalitions across difference. And we need all of those things to be true now. So I'm glad we're talking about it. Back to Reiki. I did a very similar thing with my trajectory with Reiki. I learned a very kind of classic Western Reiki, Western Usui Reiki originally, and felt out of integrity with that, because I knew that there was this whole deep wellspring of Japanese culture and history that I hadn't been taught, that I didn't know. Found that through you, Bronwen, ultimately, and went just hard left in that direction. If you're not teaching from as authentically from the Japanese origins as it is humanly possible for you to do, you're doing it wrong, and you need to stop. Right? And and I came out of the gate, at a certain point, on the one hand, very timid about that. So I went through a period of I can't talk about this because nobody else thinks this way. And so now I can't, now what am I do? I'm in this crisis of I can't talk about how I really think that it should be because nobody will agree with me, but then I have to give up Reiki. So ultimately I just came out the gate hot with y'all are wrong. All of you wrong. Right? You're doing it wrong, right? You should be doing it this way. And, and I'm exaggerating a little bit, but, I did come out with a certain amount of abrasiveness during those early years of teaching. And, really didn't want to work with students who had connections with the Western path, or who wanted to blend them, or who valued certain things about the Western Reiki that they'd known, or, there just wasn't a softness around that from how I was operating. And pretty quickly realized how alienating that is, right? To myself, to others, and that that it's unrealistic, utterly unrealistic for me to come out and say, everybody needs to only teach in this way. We need to disregard the last, 75 years of Reiki in the United States and totally do it this other way. Not realistic, not desirable, not valuable to actually hold that. And also very disrespectful to the really beautiful experiences people have inside of Western Reiki. So, when I think about and all of this, in part was me grappling with what is my niche. right? I'm a newly fledged teacher. So now we're talking about 8, 9 years ago. I'm a newly fledged teacher. I have this passion to teach in integrity and according to the origins, and I'm learning as much as I can about that. But there's this way in which I'm alienating myself because of this like hard line that I'm setting. And how do I soften that without losing connection to my values and feeling like I'm out of integrity again? And that was a really challenging question for me for a long time. I really wrestled with that for a long time. And I really, went back and forth. And ultimately, it was like my students that really showed me the way, because what I noticed is that so many people who are coming to me were people who are already trained in Western Reiki and wanted this perspective of, wanted to understand the origins and have that, tighter connection to those origins, but also really valued what they were already up to in the world, as Reiki practitioners. And that was, not something that they were going to just toss in the garbage. At the same time, I also had to acknowledge and respect and take delight in the places where my own personal history, that is not Japanese at all, absolutely is present in my Reiki practice. Right? Because in trying to be dogmatic and extreme on this other side, I was ignoring whole parts of me that were very much present in my Reiki practice. Things from my Celtic lineage, things from my American lineage, from, experiences that I've had in other spaces that were valuable and that I wanted to be present. And so all of that, was difficult self-reflection. There was a lot of painful self-reflection in there. But ultimately really ended up nestling me into what I would now call my niche. And it feels so comfortable here now, right? I feel so much spaciousness. I feel so much rootedness and so much connection, right? These three qualities that our Reiki practice can bring us, in having wrestled with those extremes, right? Having gone to those extremes and then acknowledging it and saying, ooh, that's a problem. I don't actually like where this is taking me, and finding that sweet spot back. And, in simple terms, my niche is that I'm primarily a Reiki teacher. I do Reiki sessions, of course, but my emphasis is on teaching. And I work with people who primarily want Reiki in their life for self-practice, who value the origins, the Japanese origins, and want that to be centered in their practice, not exclusive, but centered in their practice, and who have some desire to have their Reiki practice intersect with the world around them. And so having a social justice lens, having an equity lens, like wanting to find the ways in which their Reiki practice helps them to show up in the world in a way that matters to them. So those are the three characteristics of my niche. And inside of that, then I get to work with all kinds of people, right? So there's that, I love, Carrie, that you name, starting to name some of these ways that we can niche, and it can be around a certain type of treatment, right? Like niching around working with a particular condition or people experiencing a certain thing. For me, what I found is that my niche is really around values. It's around those three values: self-practice, centering the origins, and including a justice perspective. That is my niche. And then inside of that niche, I get to work with people who are experiencing a wide range of, whatever they're experiencing, and make a lot of connections. So yeah, thank you for helping me take that little walk down memory lane and really see this this pattern that exists in my life, that probably exists in other parts of my life I should pay attention to, of jumping to an extreme view of something that feels really connected to my values, and then finding the way back to a softened place around it. I value that experience. So thank you.
Thanks. Well, yeah, I've loved hearing all of those things. And it did bring me back to thinking about Usui and the beginning of the practice way back when, and how Hayashi, for example, what was normal in those days was if I studied with Usui and I went on to practice that for myself, maybe with others, I would call it the name of whatever Usui called it. Yeah. We know that Hayashi changed the name so that it, became Hayashi Reiki Kenkyukai. And that means that he respected the fact that what he was doing was different to what Usui had taught him. So he's creating his own branch, his own variety of the teachings that he had been taught, which is a respectful thing to do. It's saying that what I'm doing is different to what I was initially taught. And because he really was the first, from what we can gather, the first sort of professional out there doing treatments, I think that's sort of interesting that we think about that in terms of what we're doing. And if we are going to change things a lot, that we need to think about what we're actually calling the practice that we do and whether we should call it something different. It does amaze me actually that people will create whole different systems and still say, oh, I practice the system of Reiki. And I think, well, and this comes back to what you were talking about, Carrie, that this core, it needs to be, you called it glue, it needs to be a strong glue. It needs to be something that makes sense. It needs to be something that's solid. It's a set glue. Yeah. If we're going to practice the system of Reiki, we need to have a very strong understanding of this. Otherwise, we will get lost and we'll be off doing something else, which is fine. Go and get lost because it's part of your journey, right? That's part of who you are and what you need to go through. And we all go through different things. And I'm not perfect. What I practice is not perfect. But I think that this understanding is very important, and it comes back to this heart of what we're doing. And if we don't have an understanding of what it is that we're doing, how can we practice? If we're just changing our mind every 5 seconds about, oh no, it's this, and no, it's that, no. And if I asked you why you do that and you can't tell me, then I think, are you getting the benefit of this? Is the world getting the benefit of this? And that comes back again to what Carrie was saying. I love that you came back to that thing of why are we doing it in the first place? Yeah. We're not doing it to be able to brag about that you just spoke to Archangel Michael. It really is about healing the self. And so we need to have this this thing inside that helps us, gives us some path that we can follow, that if I have a question, I know how to answer it because I have that strength in the base of my understanding of what the hell I'm doing. And it is why they often say you should always have a teacher, because that helps to bring you back into line with what you're doing. I guess that brings me to also those ideas of lineage. What is a lineage? We sort of touched a little bit on that. We've done another podcast on that in the past. Recently I was writing a little blog, and it was just about feeling confident in your practice, and that is the thing that your teacher passes on to you, hopefully. But it's also something you can grow within yourself, and it's an ongoing experience. But ideally, as a teacher, for me, or as a practitioner, that I want the person that I'm with to find that confidence in what they're doing, so that I'm imparting something that helps them find that confidence in themselves. And then they have that heart, that strong glue that's going to be there for them, that they can draw on that. Both of you have talked about this idea of things become very dichotomous, black and white, and it's either this or that. And Carrie, you called it generalist. And I think it is rather difficult to be a generalist, because what is the glue? What is the heart? Actually, I feel like that heart, maybe there's just different layers of it, but it feels like if I'm teaching from a Japanese perspective, which I do, and I can tell you what it means from a Japanese perspective, I understand that how that relates to my body, mind, my heart, that means to me, that would be quite different to maybe someone who is teaching in a Western way. Yeah. And so we do have actually different hearts of that. Yeah. Yet beneath it all, once again, it's just sort of like these layers, isn't it? Beneath it all, there is this thing that maybe it's the glue of the world. Forget about anything else. It's tapping into this really very, very deep interconnection of all beings, and forget about names, forget about lineages, forget about anything, and just this whole very deep place that we know that we all sit in. And that would be the ultimate glue, I guess. But then we bring it up as we move up into this human world, and we bring it up into these different experiences of how we interpret that and work with that.
Yeah, I love all of that. And yeah, I mean, I think to me what kind of comes up, and I think, threads of this you were sharing, Michaela, that threads of this you were sharing, Bronwen, is that like, is how do we create, an identity around what we offer and what we do within the world of Reiki, and not be self-righteous about it, not just be like, oh, I'm better than this. And I think that that's an easy trap to get into, potentially more so at the beginning, of our journey, because we might not feel a whole lot of confidence and feel really, I mean, I know that as a yoga teacher, oh my gosh, first 5 years teaching yoga was painful, because for myself and my own mental health, yeah, I was like really in comparison, always leveling myself up to everybody else around me and not feeling good enough. Um, and I really struggled with that. I'm not gonna lie, it was a real struggle. And so some part of, creating my own identity was, uh, trying to be better than somebody else, rather than just being who I am, showing up and being my authentic self. And so that's the lovely thing. I'm so glad I've grown out of that space. Like, I'm so glad I don't have to do that anymore, because it's a painful way of, living, where it's like we're always trying to measure ourselves up against other people, rather than just being ourselves and being able to show up and be our genuine self. So I hope, if anyone's listening, that you've grown out of that. And if you're not yet grown out of it, snap out of it. You're good enough. And and niche can be reflective of that, right? It can be reflective of your values, like what you were saying, Michaela. That's absolutely true. This is the world I believe in, and that's why I do the work that I do. And that's why I offer the things that I do, because I feel like this is something that's important to me. Um, and so my values are an essential part of my business. Like, it's just an essential piece, and to live by those values and bring them and weave them into my business is very, very, very rewarding. Um, yeah, it's also a reminder too that not everyone has the same values, and just because I have these values doesn't mean that you have to have these values, otherwise you're not good enough. And that's how we can kind of use this one-upmanship. Once we feel like we've gotten to the top of the pedestal, like, now we can like shame blame everybody else who's coming up the staircase with us. One of the most relaxing statements, I think, or one of the beautiful statements, is that there's enough room for me at the top. Like, I don't have to play these games of competition. I don't have to, jump through a gazillion different hoops to be respected, and understood for who I am and what I have to offer, my own unique gifts and wisdom. So it's just a lovely feeling to like move beyond all of that. But it's a process. And you were talking about a newly fledgling Reiki practitioner. And for me, a lot of this is like, I feel in my business, like I really want to help those people, because they need help. You need support in that period of embodiment with your Reiki practice. And so I think of it as weaving a basket, and a Reiki level 1 through 3 course is really about learning how I can weave my Reiki basket. Like, can I give a session and feel comfortable doing that? Like, can I give a session to myself? Can I give it to somebody else? And I'm talking a little bit more about like somebody who's motivated to do Reiki as a business path, but even those people who do just want to learn Reiki and want to bring it more into their life. I think we've done too much within Reiki courses to try to really like make everyone who takes a Reiki course a Reiki practitioner or professional Reiki practitioner. in the sense that they're charging money for their services. Like, I love, Michaela, that you have this niche around really wanting to support people to just be their Reiki, like have Reiki be part of your practice. It might translate into offering Reiki professionally, but it also could just translate into making your life better and like enjoying Reiki, because it's an amazing practice, and it brings you so much joy and healing insight. Yeah, and then, same with like, becoming a Reiki teacher, it's like building another basket. Once you've learned how to start one basket, it's like a different basket, but you still, need to gather your leaves and you need to gather the resources you need to make that basket. And when when you make the basket, you can capture some of the bounty that's alive for us in the universe. You can fill it with oranges or your specific type of Reiki clients. So, I think that helps the extremism to some degree. It helps us be humble in the learning process. And I think there's, a smarter way of doing it too, that, through trial and error, so much of us who've been doing Reiki for many years, we're learning a better method, we're learning better ways. And the niche is like one of them. It's one of the core things that really help you build a Reiki practice. Yeah, not to say who knows that there might be a blind side or dark side to that too. But, I think building a niche is kind of more important if you live in an area that, there's a lot of other Reiki practitioners. So it is important for you to be more specific about your approach and your perspective. And then, but, sometimes also within communities where you might be living in a conservative area or a smaller town or smaller community, it's kind of almost enough to be a Reiki practitioner. I mean, Reiki could be its own niche depending on your area and what you're doing and what your perspective is. So I love to pass the mic on to my soul sister, Michaela. What do you got to say here?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the last thing that was coming up, especially as I was listening to you, Carrie, is that when we settle into that confidence and that clarity around what our perspective is, right? Like niche is another way of saying like what our perspective is. And, who am I as a person in terms of how that's reflected in my work and how I talk about my work. And, who I would love to work with, right? The people who really light me up to work with, where there's a really strong simpatico there. And one of the things that I really have found to be true as I'm reflecting on this, process for me of coming to my niche is that the more confident and settled that I got into the values that were really the most important to me, the three that I named, and like where even inside each of those values, like what that glue that you were talking about, Bronwen, like that core of each of those things is for me. In other words, that like immovable core of the mountain. Like I'm not going to move on this piece. This piece is essential. I'm not going to teach outside of this piece. I'm not going to work with people who want to step outside of this piece. I'm not a good fit for people who are not aligned with this core piece, right? We're just not a good fit. We're not meant to work together. If someone wants to kind of shift and come in this direction, great. But I am not moving from this place, right? This is my immovable mountain right here. Like, and I have a line for each of those three values that define my niche. But what I have become aware of is that there's a whole lot else that actually is flexible, right? So you talk about, one of the core teachings that I adopted from you, Bronwen, is being both firm and flexible in our process. So there's parts of my niche that are firm, like they're immovable for me. And then what I've discovered by getting really centered and grounded in those firm places is that there's a lot of other places that are actually quite flexible and where I can, open up my teaching style to make room for people who have a different view than me inside of these other places. And that metaphor of the mountain is so valuable for this because there is that bedrock at the center of the mountain. That's what makes it a mountain, that allows it to be big and mighty. But so much on the mountain is incredibly flexible, right? The soil is constantly shifting. The water that's running through the bedrock and the cracks is always flexible. The plants that are growing on the surface of the mountain are incredibly flexible. There's animals moving around the mountain that are flexible. So I think that is like, I guess, my parting point of reflection for myself and my parting words of advice for any of you who might be seeking to find a niche that feels comfortable and spacious and just, it's just like that coat that fits you so perfectly, is, really spend some time on finding the things that are your bedrock. These are the things that are absolutely the most important to you. And that might be, it is absolutely the most important thing that I'm working with people who are experiencing this problem, for example, or that are aligned with this value, or that are looking for services provided in this way, right? Like whatever the type of thing it is that matters the most to you. What is the bedrock for you that is immovable, that this defines who you are as a Reiki practitioner? And then from there, what are the layers of flexibility that ripple out from there? At a certain point, there's going to be places where I'm not going to move in that direction. And other places, there's going to be like, wow, it's actually quite delightful to now include something I hadn't thought of before. So I know I'm talking about that kind of vaguely, but because there's so many different ways that one could niche, but I think it's a way of thinking about it that can be valuable. And if any of you want to chat about that in terms of your specific thought process around your niche, I'd be happy to do that, because I find it a really fascinating conversation. And as we come to the end of this conversation, I'd love for us to just, remind our listeners that we are not sponsored. We're sponsored by ourselves. Our work is brought to you today, free on the old YouTubes, by the work that we do in the world. And so I'd love to just open it to the two of you to see if there's anything you'd like to share that you have coming up that you would like folks to know about, ways that they can be supportive of your work in the world, in your particular niche in the system of Reiki.
I have a workshop coming up in a couple of days, so I'm not sure. That's probably a bit close, but it's on hand mudras and how we use them in the system of Reiki. So how we use our hands. So thinking of it in a deeper way than how we probably consider when we're doing hands-on healing, for example. Are we aware of what's actually going on with our hands and why we work with them? I'm doing a specific workshop on that. But also, just another thing is that once a week, I do something for 15 minutes a week with students, and anyone can sign up for that. And that is that I do Reiju, which is the initiation process for the system of Reiki. We come together just for 15 minutes, and I'd love to see you there. It's a beautiful way to bring a moment of conscious awareness of who you are and what the system of Reiki is to you, and being in community with others. So come along, join me with that. And you can find all those details on my website, Reiki with Bronwen.
Carrie, what do you have coming up?
So much. So yes, what I've got cooking in my Reiki kitchen right now is, it just happened. I taught this workshop called Decolonize Your Reiki Practice and Undo the Legacy of Cultural and Spiritual Appropriation. So we can talk about all three of those topics extensively: decolonization, cultural and spiritual appropriation. It's something that we spoke many times to on this podcast, and many things that I've spoken to, Michaela and I worked particularly together on this topic as well. And it is just so happens to be a core part of my niche, a core part of who I am and the approach that I try to bring forward within the system of Reiki. And so I have, I taught it live, but I've packaged it up as a self-study course. So it's available for you for purchase at any time, although the price will increase after April 15th. So if you're listening to it now and you really wanted to join me for that workshop, it's still available to you at a discounted price, but price is going up, folks, for next time. So, and then, I guess, coming up next in my kitchen is a course I call Moving from Babylon to Avalon and Creating 7 Income Streams for Reiki Professionals. And it really is very deep in this idea of niche. So how do you build your niche? And maybe a little bit more geared towards somebody who loves the healing arts and loves Reiki, and maybe have some other, modalities in your toolkit, and you want to bring them together, and you want to bring them together in a way that feels really good. It feels in integrity, doesn't feel spiritually appropriative. Um, but then you also want it to support you financially. And so the whole course is really about building a stronger foundation for you financially, and how you go about doing that. So lots of different ways, kind of a holistic way. I will support you in that through kind of more left brain logical stuff like spreadsheets to a more right brained spiritual approach using Reiki, and really looking at Reiki to help us strengthen one of those core needs. We all need money, right? We all do. So how do we do it in the right way, and in integrity with our values, and with what we want to do in the world? So those are the things happening in my world. What about you, Michaela?
Yeah, well, I'll also talk about two places where my niche is on full display. So one is on my Thinkific classroom. So similar to you, creating standalone classes that folks can take at any time, self-paced courses that you can dip into at any time. It's a project that I started last year that I'm going to be really focused on this year, is building that library of self-paced classes inside of my Thinkific classroom. And so just as an example of classes that align with those three elements of my niche, my cultivating a trauma-informed Reiki practice classes in there, that's very much aligned with the social justice and social good side of my niche. A class on the energy map that is inherent in the Japanese origins of the system of Reiki, called Powered by the Three Diamonds, is a class very much focused on exploring those Japanese origins. And on the side of Reiki for self-practice, there's a course on building our intuition through Reiki practices that come from those Japanese origins. So just three examples of the self-paced courses that are available to you right this very minute on my Thinkific classroom. Wide range of prices and lengths, duration of the classes that are going to be showing up there. So that link will be down below. And then I'm going to make a plug for my YouTube channel, because that really is the place where I get to really freeform explore my niche and share with you such a wide range of teachings and reflections and practices that come through from the wealth of experience that I've had in all of these different realms across 3 decades of my life, weaving them together in hopefully ways that are dynamic and engaging for you. And building that YouTube channel is part of my goal for this year. So I've got about 1,260 subscribers at this very moment. My next goal is to get to 1,500 subscribers on my YouTube channel, which is Heartscapes Reiki at YouTube. And so I invite you to join me over there. Subscribing is free to you, and it just means you get to connect with me all the more often. Liking the videos, it's free. It stimulates that algorithm, lets YouTube know that you like what you're seeing. And of course, sharing those videos around with people that you think would be similarly interested. All of that helps tremendously in building a channel. So my YouTube channel, Heartscapes Reiki, and of course the YouTube channel for this very podcast, all of those same invitations are there for you if you are engaging with us over on YouTube. So yeah, help us stimulate the algorithm and increase our reach to have these conversations across a wider audience, because they're important and we believe in them very much. So thank you, friends, so much for being along with us this week. Please do join the conversation with us down in the comments. We love to know what comes up for you as you sit with these conversations. If you feel that you have a niche in your Reiki practice, or you are seeking a practitioner with a particular niche, please do let us know down in the comments. And if you've had any particular struggles or triumphs in finding your voice in your Reiki practice, how do you talk about your work, how you show up as a Reiki practitioner, let us know that as well. And until next time, thank you so much for being with us. We love you. We will catch up with you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.